We return to the Masters and the Path. Do most of you have your books? The chapter is number 5, and it is Acceptance, Union with the Master. I thought this chapter to be apropos because it is the eve of Thanksgiving, when we celebrate the wondrous gifts that God has given to us in this country, and when we also realize the great challenge that is before all of us as we go forth preaching the word of the Ascended Masters, as we remember the 3 years that are before us now. Union with the Master is our desire and our greatest need. To know that bonding of ourselves to our Holy Christ self and to our Master. If we do not achieve that in this life, then it is only we that we have to blame. So strive for that union. Acceptance by the Master, union with the Master. None of us can create that. None of us can perform it. Only the Master decides. As I read this chapter to you, think, if you were the Master, what would you expect of your Chela? And what would be acceptable in your mind and what would be unacceptable? If you will glance through the pages with me, I wish to show you a part of this teaching that I believe is not worth reading aloud. In my book, it's 100, and the title of this chapter is Sensitiveness, Mediumship, and Psychic Powers. This is what the Masters had to go with their Chelas a century ago. It is not our path today. So I have marked in my book from that chapter, sensitiveness and so forth. And I've skipped the next, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, through my number 106. And then we take up again with the heading, Messages from Adepts. How do we gain acceptance? It's like looking for approval. Have we made the grade? Have we passed the test? Is this offering enough? How can we gauge what offering we need to give when we cannot even gauge how much karma we are carrying around in our knapsacks? So, having that acceptance and knowing union with a Master must be for us the ultimate glory, the ultimate bliss. So I'll begin reading. Though the acceptance of the pupil by the Master produces so great a difference in his life, there is but a little more of external ceremony attached to it than there was in the case of probation. If one observes this ceremony with the sight of the causal body, one sees the Master as a glorious globe of living fire, containing a number of concentric shells of color, his physical body and its counterparts on other planes of being, in the center of the glowing mass, which extends to a radius of many hundreds of yards. In approaching the physical body of the Master, the pupil advances into that glowing globe of finer material. And when he finally reaches the feet of his Master, he is already in the heart of that splendid sphere. And when the Master expands himself to include the aura of the pupil, it is really the central heart of fire which so expands and includes him, for all through the ceremony of acceptance, he is already far within the outer ring of that mighty aura. Thus, for a few moments, they two are one. And not only does the Master's aura affect that of the pupil, but any special characteristics attained by the latter, the pupil, act upon the corresponding centers of the master's aura, and that flashes out in response. The inexpressible union of the pupil with the master, which begins during the ceremony of acceptance, is a permanent thing. Contemplate that. It is permanent, it will not be undone. Think how carefully the masters choose their chelas. And after that, though the pupil may be far distant from the master on the physical plane, his higher vehicles are vibrating in common with those of his teacher. He is all the time being tuned up and thus growing gradually more and more like his master, however remote the resemblance may have been in the beginning. And thus he becomes of great service in the world as an open channel by means of which the master's force may be distributed on the lower planes. By constant meditation upon his guru and ardent aspiration towards him, the pupil has so affected his own vehicles that they are constantly open towards his master and expectant of his influence. At all times they are largely preoccupied with that idea, waiting the word of the master and watching for something from him, so that while they are keenly and sensitively open to him, they are to a considerable extent closed to lower influences. Therefore, all his higher vehicles, from the astral upwards, are like a cup or funnel, open above but closed at the sides, and almost impervious to influences touching him at the lower levels. This tuning up of the pupil continues throughout the period of discipleship. At first, his vibrations are many octaves below those of the master, but they are in tune with them and are gradually being raised. This is a process that can take place only slowly. It could not be done at once, like the stamping out of a piece of metal with a die, or even comparatively quickly as one would tune a violin or piano string. Those are inanimate things, but in this case, a living being is to be molded, and in order that the life may be preserved, the slow growth from within must adapt the form to the outside influence, as a gardener might gradually direct the limbs of a tree, or a surgeon with proper appliances might by degrees straighten a crooked leg. We know that throughout this process, the master is not giving his full attention to each individual pupil, but is working upon thousands of people simultaneously, and all the time doing much higher work as well, playing a great game of chess, as it were, with the nations of the world and with all the different kinds of powers, of angels and men, as pieces on the board. Yet the effect is as though he were watching the pupil and thinking of no one else, for the attention that he can give to one among hundreds is greater than ours when we concentrate it entirely upon one. The master often leaves to some of his older pupils the work of tuning the lower bodies, though he himself is allowing a constant flow between his vehicles and those of his pupil. It is in this way he does most for his pupils, without their necessarily knowing anything about it. The accepted pupil thus becomes an outpost of the master's consciousness, an extension of him, as it were. The adept sees, hears, and feels through him, so that whatever is done in his presence is done in the master's presence. This does not mean that the Great One is necessarily always conscious of such events at the time when they are going on, though he may be so. He may be absorbed in some other work at the time. Nevertheless, the events are in his memory afterwards. What the pupil has experienced with reference to a particular subject will come up in the master's mind among his own knowledge when he turns his attention to that subject. When a pupil sends a thought of devotion to his master, the slight flash which he sends produces an effect like the opening of a great valve, and there is a tremendous downflow of love and power from the master. If one sends out a thought of devotion to one who is not an adept, it becomes visible as a fiery stream going to him. But when such a thought is directed by a pupil to his master, the pupil is immediately deluged by a stream of fiery love from the master. The adept's power is flowing outwards always, and in all directions like the sunlight. But the touch of the pupil's thought draws down a prodigious stream of it upon him for the moment. So perfect is the union between the master and the pupil that if there is any serious disturbance in the lower bodies of the pupil, it will affect also those of the master. And as such vibration which would interfere with the adept's work on higher planes, when this unfortunately happens, he has to drop a veil that shuts the pupil off from himself until such time as the storm settles down. It is, of course, sad for the pupil when he has to be cut off in this manner, but it is absolutely his own doing, and he can end the separation at once as soon as he can control his thoughts and feelings. Usually such an unfortunate incident does not last longer than 48 hours, but I have known cases much worse than that, in which the rift endured for years and even for the remainder of that incarnation. But these are extreme cases and very rare, for it is little likely that a person capable of such defection would be received as a pupil at all. The next heading, the attitude of the disciple. No one is likely to become an accepted pupil unless he has acquired the habit of turning his forces outwards and concentrating his attention and strength upon others, to pour out helpful thoughts and good wishes upon his fellow men. Opportunities for doing this are constantly offering themselves, not only among those with whom we are brought into close contact, but even among the strangers whom we pass in the street. Sometimes we notice a man who is obviously depressed or suffering. In a flash, we can send a strengthening and encouraging thought into his aura. Let me quote once again a passage which I saw a quarter of a century ago in one of the New Thought books. Knead, K-N-E-A-D, knead love into the bread you bake. Wrap strength and courage in the parcel you tie for the woman with the weary face. Hand trust and candor with the coin you pay to the man with the suspicious eyes. A lovely thought, quaintly expressed, but conveying the great truth that every connection is an opportunity, and that every man whom we meet in the most casual manner is a person to be helped. Thus the student of the good law goes through life distributing blessings all about him, doing good unobtrusively everywhere, though often the recipient of the blessing and the help may have no idea whence it comes. In such benefactions, every man can take his share, the poorest as well as the richest. All who can think can send out kindly and helpful thoughts, and no such thought has failed or ever can fail while the laws of the universe hold. You may not see the result, but the result is there, and you know not what fruit may spring from that tiny seed which you sow in passing along your path of peace and love. This brings us to the point that we have all been, where we are making up our minds. Shall I give this person a chart of the presence, a wallet-sized chart? Shall I give this? Shall I open the conversation to the Ascended Masters? Is this someone I should be bringing the message to? Is Mary Ann Allen here tonight? Why don't you come up to the mic and tell us your story? The story you told me. That was the one about when you were at the Tetons. This is so very apropos.
Well, Richard and I went camping in the Tetons last summer, or 2 summers ago. And on Sundays in the state park, they have a religious service, and it's secular, it's for anyone. But at this particular service, there was a man studying to become a Catholic priest, and he was the visiting minister that day. And so there was about 20 people at this service, and he was conducting this very nice ritual. It included readings from the Bible, and then he'd talk a little bit about it. And then there came a time when he asked everyone to pray if they wanted to, and he invited us to pray out loud, but not all together, individually. So nobody said anything. And so I was sitting there, and I was going over in my mind, kind of having this indecision. Well, should I say a prayer out loud or not? They might think I'm really silly, and I mean, the way I pray, I'd have to think about it before I say anything out loud. And I was going back and forth with this silliness, and then I heard Mother's voice say, "Do it!" and it was so loud and clear. It was the greatest thing. It made my year. So, because it was like Padre Pio, kind of getting a slap in your face, And so then I made a prayer. I think I tried to make a real secular prayer, like, "Dear God, please help the light bearers, and we send our gratitude to you for letting us live in America, and we're so grateful for this freedom." And I think I made a call on abortion. And so then after that prayer, other people made prayers too. But then after the service, the minister came rushing up to Richard and I and said, "Who are you? Where are you from?" What? So then we had this great talk for the next hour and a half, and we told him all about the teachings, and he saw my Mother Mary medal, so we were able to witness to him, and it was a really great experience. But the best part was hearing this voice of Mother loud and clear in my heart and in my mind, "Do it." And then there was no more indecision, and that was that.
So do it should be our motto. It's better to do it and have someone start a fight or, beat you up or anything than to not do it. We really have to pass the teachings along. If the student has a little knowledge of the resources of nature, he can often call them to his aid in work of this description. There are large numbers of nature spirits of a certain type, both in the woods and in the water, who are especially suitable for the ensouling of thought forms, and take very great delight in being employed in that work. The student, when walking in the fields and in forests or sailing over the water, may invite such creatures to accompany him, may even draw them into his aura and carry them along. And then when he reaches a city and begins to project his good thoughts upon those whom he meets, he can ensoul each such thought form with one of these little helpers. So your thought form becomes a matrix for an identity that is lower than your own, one of the nature spirits. So whenever you are moving about or in the forests, in the fields, invite these very precious elementals to ensoul thought forms. By doing that, he gives radiant joy and a certain amount of evolution to the friendly nature spirit, and also greatly prolongs the life and activity of his thought form. So when we have visualizations in our mind of sending love to people, what this is saying is establish a very clear image. It can be simple, but see the person you are sending your love to, smile at this person, send the thought form of a bouquet of roses or whatever it may be, and recognize that your nature spirits will sustain that thought form much longer than if you had not called upon them. So this gets into the 4 hierarchs of the elements and how we interact with them. The distribution of force. Practically all the ordinary people in the world turn their forces inwards upon themselves, and because they are self-centered, their forces are jangling together inside. but the pupil has to turn himself inside out and maintain a constant attitude of giving in affection and service. We have in the pupil, therefore, a man whose higher vehicles are a funnel open to the highest influences from his master, while his lower vehicles at the bottom of the funnel have been trained into the constant habit of radiating those influences out upon others. This makes him a perfect instrument for his master's use, for the translation of his force to the outer planes. If an adept in Tibet wanted to distribute some force at the etheric level in New York, it would not be economical to direct the current etherically for that distance. He would have to transmit his force on much higher levels to the point required and then excavate a funnel downwards at that point. Another simile which might be suggested in that of the transmission of electricity. At enormous voltages across country and the stepping of it down through transformers which give great current and low voltage at the place where the power is to be used. But to excavate such a funnel or to step the force down at New York would involve a loss to the adept of nearly half of the energy that he had available for the piece of work to be done. Therefore, the pupil on the spot is an invaluable labor-saving apparatus. That's what we are. And he must remember that above all things he must make himself a good channel, because that is most of all what the master needs from him. This is what our El Moria needs from us. Thus the pupil may be regarded in another way as an additional body for the master's use in the place where he happens to be. So when you retire this night, offer your 4 lower bodies to beloved El Moria for his use wherever he may need you. This was a discussion that was made before the adepts became ascended masters. But nevertheless, I think we should offer that call, and if El Moria sends back to us something better that he would like us to do and perform, well, we shall do that also. Every human body is in reality a transmitter for the powers of the self within. Through many ages, it has been adapted to carry out the commands of the will in the most economical manner. For example, if we wish for any reason to move or to overturn a tumbler standing upon the table, it is easy enough to stretch out one's hand and do so. It is also possible to overturn that tumbler by mere force of will without physical contact. Indeed, one of the earliest members of the Theosophical Society tried this experiment and actually succeeded, but only at the expense of devoting an hour's strenuous effort to it every day for 2 years. It is obvious that to use the ordinary physical means is in such a case far more economical. In the earlier stages of the pupil's relation with his master, he will often feel that a vast amount of force is poured through him without his knowing where it is going. He feels only that a great volume of living fire is rushing through him and flooding his neighborhood. With a little careful attention, he can soon learn to tell in which direction it is going, and a little later he becomes able to follow with his consciousness that rush of the master's power, and he can actually trace it down to the very people who are being affected and helped by it. He himself, however, cannot direct it. He is being used simply as a channel, yet is at the same time being taught to cooperate in the distribution of the force. Later there comes a time when the master, instead of pouring force into his pupil and aiming it at a person in a distant place, tells him to seek out the person and then give him some of the force, for this saves the master some energy. Whenever and wherever a pupil can do a little of the master's work, he will always give it to him, and as the pupil increases in usefulness, more and more of the work is put into his hands, so as to relieve, by however slight an amount, the strain upon the master. We think much, and rightly so, about the work that we can do down here, but all that we can imagine and carry out is as nothing to what he is doing through us. There is always a gentle radiation through the pupil, even though he may not be conscious of it, Yet the same pupil will feel it distinctly whenever an unusual amount of force is being sent. This transmission of force from a particular master is generally confined to his pupils, but any person who is seriously trying to live a life of service, purity, and refinement may be used as a channel for force. It might well happen that in any given place there was no pupil quite fitted for a certain kind of outpouring. But there might be some other person who, though not so far advanced, could yet be employed for that particular purpose. In such a case, the master would probably use him. Many varieties of force are poured out by the master for different purposes. Sometimes one person is suitable and sometimes another. Watching the case of two pupils side by side, one sees that one is used always for one type of force and the other for another kind. This outpouring is physical as well as astral, mental, and Buddhic, and on the physical plane it issues mainly through the hands and feet. On this account, as well as for general reasons, very great care must be taken about cleanliness. If the physical body of the person selected failed for a moment in this important matter, the master could not use him because the man would not be a suitable channel. It would be like pouring pure water through a dirty pipe. It would be fouled on the way. Therefore, those who are in close relation with the master are exceedingly vigilant about perfect bodily cleanliness. Let us take care, then, that we shall be fit in this respect if we are needed. My sense of this is that we must always be prepared, always faithful. Another point about which we need to be watchful if we wish to be of use is to avoid distortion, especially of the feet. Not long ago, I stayed for a few weeks in a community where it is the custom to walk barefooted, and I was horrified to see the twisted and crippled appearance of the feet of many of the students and to observe how seriously this deformity interfered with their usefulness as channels of the master's force. The natural course for that force, under ordinary conditions, is to fill the whole body of the pupil and rush out through the extremities. But in cases where unhygienic footgear has produced permanent malformation, the adept can utilize only the upper half of the body. And as that imposes upon him the additional trouble of constructing each time a sort of temporary dam or barrier in the neighborhood of the diaphragm of the pupil, it inevitably follows that others who are free from this disfigurement are employed far more frequently. The transmission of messages. Sometimes the master sends a definite message through his pupil to a third party. I remember once being told to deliver such a message to a very high intellectual member whom I did not know very well. I felt a little embarrassment in approaching him on such a subject, but of course I had to do it. So I said to the recipient, "I have been told by my master to give you this message, and I am simply doing as I am told. I am perfectly aware that I cannot give you any evidence that this is a message from the master, and I must leave you to attach to it just as much importance as you feel disposed. I have no alternative but to carry out my instructions." End of quote. I was, of course, conscious of the contents of the message because I had had to take it down, and I aver that on the face of it, it was a perfectly simple and friendly message, such as might have been sent by any kindly person to another, without appearing to bear any special significance whatever. But evidently appearances were deceptive. The old gentleman to whom I delivered it looked much startled and said, "You need not take any trouble to try to persuade me that that is a message from your master. I know it instantly from the wording. It would have been absolutely impossible for you to know the meaning of several of the references that he makes." But to this day, I have no idea what he meant. It is, however, but rarely that a message is given in such a form as that. There seems to be much misconception on this subject. So it may be useful to explain exactly how messages are usually conveyed from higher to lower planes. We shall understand this more easily if we consider the relation between these planes, the difficulties in the way of communication between them, and the various methods by which these difficulties are overcome. Messages from adepts. Many of us have been long meditating daily upon our great masters, some of us for years. We have drawn ourselves near to them by the intensity of our reverence and devotion, and it often happens to the more to the more fortunate among us to come into personal touch with them, and sometimes to be charged by them with messages for less fortunate brethren. Anyone who is honored by being charged with such a message will, I am sure, make every effort to transmit it with painstaking accuracy. But he must remember that he is by no means free from the general law in such matters, and he must be very definitely on his guard lest his own predilections or dislikes should in any way color what he is directed to say. You may think that that is impossible, that a master would take the trouble to ensure the accurate delivery of any message which he sent. But you must remember that the great adepts themselves work under universal law, and that they cannot alter its provisions for our convenience. Now, if the masters cannot break the law and alter its provisions for our convenience, we ourselves should not alter our concept of the law and push it a little in this direction and a little in that direction and compromise here and compromise there. The law is the law, geometry is geometry. It does not bend. So these are one of the cardinal virtues that we must embody. There are cases such as that which I have just mentioned, in which a direct charge of great importance is dictated word by word and written down on the physical plane at the time by the recipient, but such cases are exceedingly rare. Let me try to describe, as far as physical words will do, what usually takes place when a master conveys a message through one of his disciples. In the first place, let it be understood that an adept habitually keeps his consciousness focused upon a very high plane, usually that which we call nirvana. He can, of course, in an instant bring it down to any level where he wishes to work, but to descend below the causal body involves a limitation which it is rarely worth his while to undertake. The pupil, when out of his body, functions at different levels according to his development, but anyone who is likely to be entrusted with a message would probably be using at least his causal body, and it often happens that communications are exchanged at that level. To understand this transference of ideas, therefore, we must try to see what form such a communication would take. This is very important to us because we all have an inner teacher. We have a Holy Christ self through whom we commune with our mighty I Am presence. Our desire to communicate with God is great. This is why we write our letters. We burn them. We pour out our heart's burdens, desires, concepts, gratitude, many reasons why we write to the masters and burn those letters. So communication between the higher octaves and the lower octaves where we dwell is extremely important. And as we grow in grace, we will have a fine inner ear and a fine attunement to understand when we are in the presence of the masters. So knowing the cycles and the steps to communication with our I Am presence and the Ascended Masters is very important. One of the ways we get there is through the violet flame and our other decrees. Why is this so? Because we clear the debris of our auras. When we do our estrellas, we get rid of a tremendous amount of effluvia, and on the days that we give 144 estrellas, we should then, if it is the evening, go directly to our beds, to a place of quiet rest, and not start fooling around and doing this and doing that and chattering and whatever. Because at that moment, when we've done 144 estrellas, it's like we're as clean as we could possibly be. We're clean as a whistle. So we go back to our rooms, we meditate upon the Master that we are communing with. We may do some prayers, we may do yoga, we may do whatever brings us into a higher communion with God. So having the open door of our hearts to our Holy Christ self and continually speaking with our Holy Christ self, walking and talking with our Holy Christ self, brings us by and by to that place when we are always walking and talking with God. And we know that we are doing so, and we understand the accuracy of it. So we have to continually test and try the spirits to be certain that what we think we are hearing comes from our God center. So anytime you've had a good decree session, Even if it isn't that long, but if you've been part of a long session, you are in the most ultimate situation to accelerate. So take advantage of it and know that these are very holy moments, very holy moments. You may talk to El Morya about the state of the world, what is coming upon us, what job am I going to take, or what job will be offered to me, all the questions that we may have and the fear and doubt. That is the moment to resolve those issues because you have so much fire around you in those very moments. Here on the physical plane, we may put our thought or our emotion into spoken words. We know that such words are not used in the higher life, but that the emotions and thoughts take definite floating forms on the astral and mental planes, respectively. As a rule, each thought and each emotion makes its own separate form, though when they are mixed, we find forms in which the colors are curiously blended. Suppose that we try to raise ourselves in imagination to that high part of the mental plane on which the ego functions in his causal body, and let us see how his ideas express themselves there. As usual, language fails us, but one principal point of difference is that the ego does not use words and sentences at all, nor does he express such things in a succession of thoughts. He does not appear to think about a subject in our sense of the word at all. He never argues it out and thereby arrives at a conclusion as we do down here. When a subject comes before him, he sees it and knows all about it. If he wishes to convey an idea to another, it is as though he threw at him a kind of ball which somehow includes knowledge and inferences all in one. Nor does he in the least confine himself to projecting a single idea. The thought of an adept showers upon his pupil a kind of hailstorm of lovely little spheres, like blowing bubbles, each of which is an idea with its relation to other ideas quite clearly worked out. But if the pupil is fortunate enough to remember and clever enough to translate such a hailstorm, he is likely to find that it may need 20 pages of foolscap to express that one moment's deluge. And even then, of course, the expression is necessarily imperfect. Furthermore, it has to be recognized that no words have been given to him, only ideas, and therefore he must of necessity express those ideas in his own language. The ideas are the master's, if he is fortunate enough to have caught and interpreted them accurately, but the form of expression is entirely his own. Therefore, his idiosyncrasies will certainly appear, and people reading the message will say, "But surely that is so-and-so's style," referring to the intermediary to whom the message was confided. In saying so, they are of course quite right, but they must not allow that obvious fact to blind them to the spirit or the importance of the message. We find that people have their expectations when they come and hear dictations, many times for the first time. And so they expect to hear a dictation given in a certain way because they have thought all of their lives that this is the way an ascended master would dictate to an unascended Chela. So this happened to Mark Prophet, and it was one of the stories he's told many times, and most of you may remember it. But there was this very self-important person that came to Washington and was going to attend a conference, did attend a conference, and Mark was delivering a dictation, and the master had dictated some words in French. And Mark did not pronounce those words in French perfectly. And so this very pompous individual told him that he could not possibly be a messenger because obviously Saint Germain knows how to pronounce these words. That was the end of the story of this individual. He wasn't interested in going any further on the path because the messenger was a phony. So, long ago, Madame Blavatsky, referring to the letters which were at that time, 1888, frequently received from the adepts, wrote, this is the fine print that you don't have, "It is hardly one out of 100 occult letters that is ever written by the hand of the master in whose name and on whose behalf they are sent, as the masters have neither need nor leisure to write them. And when a master says, "I wrote that letter," it means only that every word in it was dictated by him and impressed under his direct supervision. Generally, they make their chela, whether near or far away, write or precipitate them by impressing upon his mind the idea they wish expressed, and if necessary, aiding him in the picture printing process of precipitation. It depends entirely upon the chela's state of development how accurately the ideas may be transmitted and the writing model imitated. When the pupil has for years been accustomed to transmit messages for the master, he will attain by constant practice a far greater facility and accuracy in translation. But that is because he has learned to allow for his own personal equation so that he is able practically to rule it out. Even so, modes of expression which he is in the habit of using are likely to occur simply because they are to him the best way of expressing certain ideas. But when a person of the development and extensive experience of Dr. Besant, for example, conveys a message, we may be quite certain that its sense is accurate and that the form of its expression is the best that can be attained on this plane. We're at a juncture now if anyone would like to make a statement or ask a question. It's kind of nice to break up the evening. Hi.
I wanted to share something. You mentioned elementals earlier, and this has been something that's been going on with me recently. A few years ago, I decided I had all these elementals that supposedly were assigned to me. And so I thought, I got to get to know these fellows and ladies, as the case may be. But anyway, as time's gone on, I see them occasionally. And I just recently, in the last 2 years, have figured out that there's a couple of them that come and visit me fairly regularly. And I didn't realize how physical their life was compared to, I mean, they're, from what I understand anyway, their life is just as physical to them as ours is. And we don't understand this, and part of this is a plea for the elementals to people pay a little bit more attention to them. And anyway, I have this one elemental that comes to see me fairly regularly, and I noticed in the last week or two that he wasn't looking right, and then I wasn't seeing him around, and I wasn't sure what was going on, And so, since we've known each other for quite a few years, I guess I don't know how long I've known him. He might have been around his whole life. But anyway, he was sick. Apparently they do get sick, from what I understand. And anyway, I came home about a week ago, and I came into my bedroom, and I had this one focus that he overshadows. And I saw him there, and I kind of cornered him. I can't always, the thing is really frustrating. For a while, I used to see his lips move, and I can't hear anything. Sometimes I can understand what's going on because I sort of get the idea in my head, I guess. But anyway, he was. I said, "What's going on? Where have you been? What's the problem here?" Because I really feel very close to this little guy, and so anyway, I think what was happening is he was sick, and he didn't want me to know he was sick. This is my own synopsis. It may not be totally correct, but I think what he was doing was taking on the diesel pollution for me so I could do my job. And because I looked at him and I saw this grayness, and I was afraid. My biggest concern about these guys, this is the second time this has happened to me in the last 3 years with another one of the guys that I know. Anyway, so I didn't want him to leave embodiment. I don't want him to earn his threefold flame. So I'm trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do, and I made calls. Like I said, I think he was trying to hide this from me, and for whatever reason, I don't know if my perception was correct. But anyway, I started making calls, and I was talking to a friend of mine. I should have called Raya, a health practitioner, and I said, "Well, what do you do for a sick elemental?" Just kind of jokingly, and she said, "Well, a friend of hers is a health practitioner, and she has to do these procedures that take two people, and she lives somewhere where there's not two people, so she calls to the angels to be the other person and to put their hands on the PowerPoints or whatever." And so I made this call, and for this guy, I was making a lot of calls for him, and he's improved and everything. He seems to be doing very, very well from what I can tell. Like I say, it's not like I see them all the time. It's just whenever it happens. So whenever I feel, I see them, or whenever my Holy Christ self wants me to see something is when I see it. But anyway, I thought maybe you could give us some kind of input on the elementals. And I'm also asking sometime whenever you have time to teach more about them, I'd like to hear about that.
Well, I'm reminded of a dictation that Jesus gave, in which he gave the resurrection flame to the elementals. This was many years ago. Mm-hmm. We should get it out and look at it. But the elementals, as I recall, it's been a long time since I looked at this material, that the elementals will not have a threefold flame until humanity has raised their consciousness. So they have very sad processions of their funerals. Mark used to speak of this often. And their sadness is so great because they know that their life is over and it's final. And they will not re-embody, they will not come back again. They just have one lifespan. And they bear children, and so their children carry on. And the elementals of the four kingdoms, you can read about that in on prophecy, the prophecy book.
So, well, I don't want to interrupt you, but is there any way that we can help? I mean, for instance, this particular friend of mine, because that to me is...
Well, what I would be doing for the elementals is always the violet flame, because the violet flame helps us to help them get the burden off of their bodies of world karma, the effluvia, and whether this is a water elemental or a gnome or
I think he's a gnome,
a sylph and so forth, fiery salamander. If we give lots of violet flame for them, we will be establishing a force field around them so that they can extend their life. Because what causes human beings, mortals as well as elementals, to die is that we can no longer carry the weight of our own human creation. We just simply cannot carry it. It's so heavy. And that's why they go down with cancer, they go down with terminal diseases. So we're much like the elementals. And if we can stay the day and the hour of their passing, we might have also, in the meantime, accelerated our own resurrection flame, our own threefold flames, and maybe if we all want to do this, we could get together and hold a balance for the elementals, so that before they have to go to their physical death, they will perhaps have earned a threefold flame. So then that means we need to teach them how you make good karma.
Yeah, I make calls for them every day, but I also try to remember the teaching that you gave to extend your heart flame to them so they can make the calls. I try to get them to tell them to make calls and so forth. And just one other thing is that one time when you came back from South America, and towards the end of the program when you had the pink sashes on, there was a gnome. Just out of the corner of my eye, just for a second, I saw this image. He was on top of the chair over there, but he had a pink hat and he had a pink sash, and he was all dressed up in his best finery there.
It's adorable, isn't it? Thank you.
Hi, Mother. Hi. This is something has happened to me twice, once in Pasadena and once at Biggsburg. I was on guard duty at Pasadena once. It was at night, and it was absolutely, totally still, not a bit of wind. And I went up to a door to shut it, and it was just open. And it was pretty unusual that it was open. I mean, it's like somebody was extremely careless leaving it open like that. And as I was walking up to close the door, it slammed in front of me. And there was absolutely no one anywhere. And there was no wind, period. So I'm standing there. Is somebody trying to scare me, or what's going on? And so that, many years have gone by since then. And I just thought it must have been the fallen winds trying to make me scared or something. So, but it didn't work. About 2 months ago, I was going to go to the kitchen at Biggsburg. And, I wanted to go open. This time the door was closed. I wanted to go in just to go into the kitchen, and the door was definitely closed. There was no wind. I just walk up the stairs, and I go to go there, and the door flies open. I mean, with a lot of force, just like the one in Pasadena did. I mean, this had nothing to do with wind or anything physical. It was absolutely impossible for this to have happened. So my question is, I guess, is in both of these cases, what happened was something I wanted to happen. Are elementals pranksters or something, or are they do?
They're very mischievous.
It's just definitely it's just something.
It's not necessarily that you wanted it to happen, but maybe he's just playing a little prank, But the idea that the door swings open strongly or closes strongly does not bespeak the presence of an ascended master.
Oh no, I don't think it's ascended master.
No, so I'm just by the process of elimination. Nor is it an elemental who is in his own God control. It could be an elemental that's imprisoned by the forces of evil, by demons and so forth.
Yeah, I've been assuming that this is not of the light, that it's...
So give your powerful fiats.
Yeah, that's what I do.
On that spot. So it's a learning process to have experiences like this, so that you can separate the tares from the wheat and figure out. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes much later in your life, other things come together, and then you see clearly what you had experienced many years before.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So let's get back now to the personal equation. For those of us who have not yet attained to that level, the personal equation is certain to intrude itself. Unfortunately, it often does so not only with regard to the style of the communication, which after all is not so very important and can easily be discounted, but also with regard to its substance. To understand why and how this is so, we must consider for a moment the constitution and development of the man through whom the messages come. Our older students will remember that in the book Man, Visible and Invisible, I gave a number of illustrations of the astral and mental bodies of men at various stages of their progress. Those illustrations, however, gave only the exterior appearance of those bodies. That part of each vehicle which is always in relation with the astral or mental world around the man and is therefore kept in a condition of fairly constant activity. We must remember that these ovoids of astral and mental matter are only superficially vitalized, and that in the case of the average man, the surface layer which is thus affected is usually thin. There is always a large proportion in each vehicle which is not yet vivified. A heavy core which takes almost no part in the outer activities of the vehicle and is indeed but little moved by them. But though this mass of comparatively inert matter is scarcely influenced by the more awakened portion, it is quite capable of acting upon the latter in certain ways. We have spoken of the personality as being in fact a fragment of the ego, working through these lower vehicles, the mental, astral, and physical bodies. A fairly full account of the method and detail of this working will be found in chapter so-and-so of this book, chapter 8, Inner Life, under the heading Lost Souls, Talks on the Path of Occultism, Volume 2, Fragment 3, Chapter 2. It is explained there that the ego is by no means fully alert as yet, but that in many cases what I suppose we must call a large portion of him, absurd as it sounds, is not yet in activity. It is the monad which vivifies the ego, but in all of us as yet the ego is only partially awakened. Exactly in the same way it is the ego which animates the personality, but that work also is very far from being perfectly done as yet. And because of these facts, certain conditions are set up which it behooves us to take careful note. In some exalted moment, an inrush of power from the ego may temporarily raise the standard of the personality. What I gather from this teaching, and if anyone knows theosophy well, correct me, but my gathering is that the ego is higher, at a higher level than the personality, and that the ego is a positive presence. In some exalted moment, an inrush of power from the ego may temporarily raise the standard of the personality, while on the other hand, a steady pressure from the unused portion of the astral or mental body may for the time appreciably lower it. This lethargic mass of unilluminated matter has a certain life and tendencies of its own, which assert themselves when the more active part of the personality is somewhat in abeyance, and that happens more especially when the man himself is not actively using those bodies. These qualities naturally vary with different people, but an intense egotism is almost always prominent. The thoughts and impressions generated by this sluggish kernel are often those of conceit and self-glorification, and also of instinctive self-preservation in the presence of any danger, whether real or imaginary. Before we reach the flashing glories of the developed man, there is a long period of slow unfoldment during which this heavy core is being gradually permeated by the light, being warmed and thawed into glowing response. But it is a slow process to escape from this subtle domination of the personality. So the personality is the problem here. It will, of course, be gradually eliminated as the man brings the whole of his nature under control, but meanwhile he will be very wise to doubt most seriously any communications which glorify the personality, or suggest to him that he alone is chosen out of all mankind to receive some stupendous revelation which is to revolutionize the world. Some such promise is the regular stock in trade of the communicating spirit in many private inspirational seances. But we must not therefore assume intentional deceit on the part of that spirit. He is very often so strongly impressed by certain great facts which loom large before him in the astral life that he feels that if only these could be adequately presented to the world, its attitude would indeed be wholly changed, forgetting that the same ideas were promulgated again and again during his physical lifetime, and that he himself did not take the slightest notice of them. It illustrates the old remark of Dives to Abraham: if one went to them from the dead, they would repent. And the result shows the wisdom of Abraham's reply: if they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, even though one rose from the dead. It is precisely the insidious but constant pressure of this subconscious self which lays a man, otherwise of average common sense, open to extraordinary self-deception, so that he is able to accept without protest flattery which without that influence he would at once see to be ridiculous. It was to this strange undeveloped subconsciousness that Madame Coué appealed with much success. One of its peculiarities is that it seems always to resent any effort of the awakened part of the personality to impress it by means of the will. Being indolent and prejudiced, it sets itself always against any change, any attempt to arouse it and to set it to work. Therefore, Monsieur Coué especially advised his patients not to use their will at all, for that would only awaken opposition, but simply and quietly to repeat a suggestion until this subconscious self absorbed it. It will be recollected that one of the methods used to impose such an impression upon another was to make it during the sleep of his physical body. Even the autosuggestion was to be done as nearly as possible in the same way. The patient was adjured to sink into slumber softly murmuring, "Every day and in every way I am growing better and better." We thought that was coined about 25 years ago, didn't we? And such is the power of a constantly reiterated insinuation that the subconscious self presently became fully charged with this idea, which readily harmonized with its irrepressible egotism, and radiated it steadily upon the more active consciousness until definite results were produced. So the undeveloped mass, which to the ignorant may prove a danger and a source of weakness, may actually be used by the wise man to help him on his upward way. The moral of all this is that ignorance is always dangerous, and that even the noblest intentions cannot always atone for a lack of scientific knowledge. Any sportive or scheming entity can beguile a man who is little acquainted with the hidden laws of nature, while he who has studied them can avoid many pitfalls. Yet even he should not presume upon his knowledge, for unceasing vigilance is the price of accuracy. Much advice has been given as to this, and assuredly we shall do well to heed it. The remainder of this section I wrote in the margin, excellent. Avoid all personal feeling, pride most of all. Distrust profoundly all glorification of the individual, for ambition is the first curse, and the power which the disciple shall covet is that which shall make him appear as nothing in the eyes of men. Be humble if thou wouldst attain to wisdom. Be humbler still when wisdom thou hast mastered. He who forgets himself utterly and devotes his life wholly to the service of others will be saved thereby from many dangers. His heart will be pure as crystal, so that the light of the Logos may shine through it unsullied. His whole nature will respond so truly to the vibrations of his master that thoughts and messages from higher planes will flow through him undistorted, uncontaminated by any lower touch. So shall he serve our masters best, by serving the humanity which they love. I thought that was a brilliant summation of what gets to be a bit obtuse in the writings that are a century old and not in our easier style. Now the next one, testing thought. Another most valuable privilege which the accepted pupil enjoys is that of laying his thought on any subject beside that of his master and comparing them. It will be readily understood how the frequent use of this power will keep the pupil's thought running along noble and liberal lines, how he will constantly be able to correct any mistakes, any tendencies towards prejudice or lack of understanding. There may be various ways in which he can exercise this power. My own method was always to lie down in meditation and endeavor to reach up into the consciousness of the Master just as far as I possibly could. When we physically reach up, we have the sense that we're reaching up. So just don't do this mentally, but do it physically. If you want to lie down on your bed and reach up as high as you can reach to the Masters. You might measure your reach and put a picture of the Master at that point where your hands reach the highest place. When I had reached the highest point that was for the time possible to me, I suddenly turned and looked back, as it were, upon the subject in question, and instantly received an impression of how it appeared to the Master. It was probably very far from being a perfect impression, but at least it showed me what he thought on the matter, as far as I was able to enter in to his thought. So if we press the walls of heaven, the walls will give if we keep on pressing. If we reach and then reach beyond our reach, we will poke right through to the next octaves. That is what I am seeing in this book. I am seeing that it is showing us how, by what we do, what we think, how we love, how we serve, that we are rising into other dimensions. I think I could safely and fairly say that each one of us in this room is walking around in a different dimension. The dimension you have chosen, the dimension where you have said, well, I'm comfortable here, and I fit in this particular dimension, and so this is where I'm going to be. Or if we never want to stop and we want to keep going higher, we have to keep on scraping the walls, scraping the ceiling, going through the ceiling, going to the next level and the next level. So if we want with all our might to live in that octave, the etheric octave in the heaven world, well, we have to reach for it mentally in our fiats, in our decrees. It's a decree you can make. Mighty I Am Presence, call me to the highest level of the octaves of light that I am able to withstand, to work with, to be with, to be a part of my life. Let's not just sit here and think, well, here we are in the material universe and one day we'll be in the spiritual universe. There's so many planes in between. So scrape through and see where you get. Care, however, must be taken that this wonderful privilege is not misused. It is given to us as a power of ultimate reference in questions of great difficulty, or in the cases where we have no sufficient ground for judgment and yet have to come to some decision. But it is by no means intended to save us the trouble of thinking, or to be applied to the decision of ordinary everyday questions which we are perfectly competent to settle for ourselves. Those who meditate long upon a master and form a strong thought image of him presently find that that thought image is definitely vivified by that master, so that they receive through it an unmistakable outpouring of spiritual force. So is it Jesus or Paul who said, "Try the spirits to see if they are of God"? So try the ascended masters and see how far they will take you by your persistent knocking and knocking and knocking at the door and fulfilling all the things they have told us we must do in order to be in their presence. This is as it should be. This is precisely the object of such meditation. And through it, the pupil comes to know the influence so well that he can always recognize it. There have even been cases, though they are happily rare, in which some evil entity has personated as master in order to deceive a student. But such an attempt can succeed only if there is in the latter, in the student, some subtle weakness, such as conceit, ambition, jealousy, selfishness, which an insidious tempter can arouse and foster until it becomes a fatal bar to spiritual progress. Unless the roots of such qualities are sternly and thoroughly eliminated, the aspirant is never free from the possibility of being deceived, of deception. But if he be truly humble and selfless, he need have no fear. So the definition of a discarnate entity that is on the dark side is that conceitedness, that pride. They always move with pride, and they got that pride from Lucifer, Satan, and so forth. The candidate for acceptance must necessarily watch himself closely. If he has not received any direct hint from his master or from some older pupil as to the special failings which he must try to avoid, he will do his best to observe these for himself. And having once decided upon them or been told of them, he will exercise unceasing vigilance against them. These are the flaws in our character. At the same time, he should be warned on no account to overdo his introspection and allow himself to become morbid. The safest of all lines for him to take is to concentrate his attention on the helping of others. If his mind is full of that thought, he will instinctively move in the right direction. The desire to fit himself thoroughly for that work will impel him to brush all obstacles out of the way, so that without consciously thinking of his own development at all, he will yet find that it is taking place. You could almost put the word there, taking place automatically, because that is exactly what happens. The more you give, the more you are filled with the Holy Spirit. Relaxation. It is not expected that a pupil shall be ever actively thinking of nothing else but the master, but it is expected that the form of the master shall always be in the background of his mind, always within immediate reach, always there when needed in the vicissitudes of life. Our minds, like bowstrings, cannot be kept always taut. Reasonable relaxation and change of thought is one of the necessities of mental health. But the pupil should be exceedingly careful that there is no slightest tinge of impurity or unkindness about his relaxation. No thought should ever be permitted, even for a moment, which the pupil would be ashamed that his master should see. There is no harm whatever in reading a good novel for the sake of diversion. The thought forms engendered by it would not in any way interfere with the current of the master's thought. But there are many novels full of evil insinuation, novels which bring impure thought forms before the mind, novels which glorify crime and others, which concentrate the thought of their readers on the most unsavory problems of life, or vividly depict scenes of hatred and cruelty. All such should be rigorously avoided. In the same way, there is no harm in taking part in or watching all ordinary games which are fairly played, but any which are rough and boisterous, any in which any sort of cruelty is involved, any in which there is likelihood of injury to man or beast, all these are absolutely barred. Whether it is this or elsewhere, as I read this section quite some time ago, I monitored myself to see how long it would take me to remove from my four lower bodies a movie. I don't even remember what movie it was, but it was sometime in the last months. And by the time I got rid of this, it was at least 3 or 4 days where I was still seeing the images and the pictures. And it came home to me so strongly because of these very paragraphs that it is ridiculous to put oneself in front of a TV screen or a motion picture that has violence of any kind, that does not have a real point to it, is uplifting and so forth. I found that what I lost in a number of days of allowing myself to be exposed to this was really absolutely not worth it. So please remember that, as Paul said, ye did run well. Who did hinder you that you did not obey the truth? We're running well. We've done our astrayas. We're in a high plane of the consciousness of God. We feel that attunement. We light our candles before we go to sleep at night. And then we go see some stupid movie, the next week. There's, you have to keep running, as Paul said. You did run well. Who did hinder you that you did not obey the truth? So look for good movies and don't go to the others. Don't let violence into your solar plexus. What will happen is you will feel estranged from your master. It's exactly what will happen. You will feel estranged from your master because he cannot get near you because you've got this junk. And we sure are the movie generation. My children are the movie generation. I mean, movies have been in for a long time, and the only way to shake people alive is to inject violence. It's very bad. So think about it before you go to the next movie. Calm and balance. In all the work which the disciple has to do, he must be careful to preserve calm and balance. Calm and balance. When do you recognize that you feel that calm? And when do you recognize all of a sudden that things are no longer calm and you hadn't noticed? Balance in the four lower bodies is a magnificent thing. Having the temple in balance makes you very strong. Overwork, which is not uncommon among the young and enthusiastic, shows lack of wisdom. Each of us should do as much as he can, but there is a limit which it is not wise to exceed. I have heard Dr. Besant say, "What I have not time to do is not my work." Yet no one labors more strenuously and unceasingly than she. If we use our forces reasonably for the task of today, we ought to be stronger to face the duties which tomorrow brings. To overstrain ourselves today so that we shall be useless tomorrow is not really intelligent service, for we spoil our power for future work in order to gratify today's unbalanced enthusiasm. Of course, emergencies occasionally arise in which prudence must be cast aside in order that some piece of work may be finished in time. But the wise craftsman will try to look ahead sufficiently to avoid unnecessary crises of that sort. The second way in which the disciple must endeavor to preserve calm and balance is with regard to his own interior attitude. What is your own interior attitude as you walk around and do the things that you do? What is that interior attitude? Examine it. Look at it. Is it an attitude of joy, calmness, a devotion, a steadiness, so that we don't do just what this says, do all this work and then flop the next day and so forth? What is one's interior attitude? We can design that interior attitude because it's part of us. We can design any part of ourselves that we want to change. So what is your interior attitude? Your interior attitude should be a vibration that is never below the heart. That's the criterion, never below the heart. When you have the joy of the heart, you have the joy of Jesus, and let your interior attitude be Jesus' joy. Let my joy be in you, let your joy be full. A certain amount of fluctuation in his feelings is inevitable, but he must try to minimize it. All sorts of exterior influences are always playing upon us, some astral or mental, some purely physical. And though we are usually entirely unconscious of them, nevertheless they affect us more or less. On the physical plane, the temperature, the states of the weather, the amount of moisture in the atmosphere, over-fatigue, the condition of one's digestive organs, all these things and many more are factors in our feeling of general well-being. And that feeling in turn affects not only our happiness, but our capacity for work. Equally, without our knowledge, we are liable to be affected by astral conditions which vary in different parts of the world, just as climates, temperatures, and physical surroundings do. Sometimes in the life of the outer world, an unpleasant companion attaches himself to us and is dismissed only with difficulty. In the astral world, it is far less easy to rid oneself of some parasitically disposed degenerate, or even of some unfortunate defunct person drowned in the depths of despair. Such a one, clinging convulsively to a man, may drain away much of his vitality and flood him with gloom and depression, without being in the slightest degree helped thereby. We may be quite unaware of such an entity, and even if we know of it, it is often no easy matter to relieve his distress, or if that be impossible, to shake off the incubus of his presence. There are unconscious vampires on the astral plane just as there are on the physical, and in both cases they are most difficult to help. The general development of the pupil makes him readily responsive to all these influences, whether he is aware of them or not, so he is likely to find himself occasionally inexplicably elated or depressed. The astral elemental immensely enjoys violent alternations of feeling and does all that he can to encourage them, but the disciple should not allow himself to be the playground of all these changing moods. He should endeavor to maintain a steady level of joyous serenity, unruffled by passing agitations. Sometimes he will have the good karma to encounter some great encouragement, some definite stimulation of his progress, such as was afforded, for example, by the opportunity to attend the magnificent Jubilee Convention at Adyar. That was indeed an occasion to be remembered for the extraordinary stimulus and help which it gave to all those who opened their hearts to its influence. Such a happening may well be a milestone on the upward path of the student, from which he may date the opening of additional power, the attainment of a fuller realization of what brotherhood really means. He will, however, do well to remember that after a splendid outpouring, an unusual upliftment of that sort, there necessarily comes a certain reaction. There is nothing in the least alarming or unnatural about that. It is a manifestation of a law of nature of which we see constant examples in everyday life. Many of us, for example, live rather sedentary lives, doing a great deal of reading and writing. Probably most of us do not give our physical bodies quite enough exercise, not as much as they need. Then that fact suddenly occurs to us and we make a great spurt. We play some violent games perhaps, or go off for a long walk or something of that sort. As long as we do not overdo it, that is very good. But when we have done it, when we have played our game or had our walk, a feeling of lassitude comes over us and we want to sit down and rest. That again is quite right and quite natural. We have been perhaps a little overstraining on a number of muscles, which we do not generally use, or at least we do not use them so violently, and consequently they are tired and need relaxation. Therefore, we have a rather limp feeling. We sit down or lie down, and after half an hour's repose, under ordinary circumstances, we are all right again. But during that half hour of quiet which we have to take, we must remember that we are in a passive condition. And therefore, if there happen to be a disease germs in the air, as there generally are, and we are a little more likely to be affected by them just at that time than at any other, the same thing is true at other levels, and when we have had a great upliftment and stimulation, our various vehicles have been strained a little more than they are accustomed to be. I do not say that it is a bad thing for us in any way. It has been a very good thing for us, but still the fact remains that our various bodies have done more than they generally do, and consequently there comes this period when they need relief from the strain. There are various ways in which that period of rest has its little dangers. The relaxation, the slipping back from the height at which we have been living, brings first of all a certain risk that we may slip back a trifle too far. That letting ourselves subside somewhat from that exalted spiritual condition, we may glide further down into materiality than in ordinary life, so that some little casual temptation, which in a general way would have no effect upon us, may possibly catch us unawares. That is one possibility against which we may not be on our guard, some little temptation which usually we should hardly notice. In that slight reaction of fatigue, we might feel a little more self-indulgent than we should normally be, and so we might make some quite foolish mistake which commonly we would not make. There is a correspondence to the disease germ too. While we are resting, there are all sorts of thought forms floating about. Some pleasant enough and some distinctly unpleasant, many of them at any rate below the level at which our thought ordinarily works. We should be more likely to be affected by those during that reaction period. What I think we should imagine is a chart before us, and we are drawing the line. Let's say we're drawing the line through the heart chakra. This is the level of my heart chakra. This is where my Holy Christ self abides, and I will not go lower than that level into the emotional body, into the lower chakras. But I will purify and spin my chakras. I will keep them balanced. But no matter what I have been doing, whatever situation I may be in, I draw the line. And we all know that we have a line that we have to draw if we're Chelas of El Morya, and each one of us has to know what that line is. And when we keep that line, we are always in touch with El Morya. The dark powers. Now this is all about acceptance, and this chapter is not going to be finished unless the dark powers are taken up. There are other considerations about which it is just as well that we should know something. At such a time of upliftment as that of which we have spoken, we receive a very unusual outpouring of spiritual force from on high, from the Great White Brotherhood, from our individual masters and teachers. There is an obscure law in nature which produces this rather curious result, that whenever there is a great outrush of higher and grander forces, there is also a corresponding efflux of undesirable energy. We've seen this year in, year out, the day after a conference. We know exactly what that energy is. We don't always deal with it entirely, but we have a great track record in our community of decreeing the days after major events. And for the moment, I'd like to thank everyone for that support, because it does fall back on me when the whole community does not carry the dark powers, bind them and remove them. And at the same time, everyone is weary because you've all participated in the event. It may seem strange, but it undoubtedly is so. It has been put sometimes that when the great ones working on the side of evolution permit themselves to give an unusual benediction in some curious kind of balance or fairness, they must allow a similar outflow of force on the other side. We have heard much of darker powers, of black magicians, of brothers of the shadow. These men are following an absolutely different line from ours, a line which brings them into collision with the masters of the wisdom, with a hierarchy which directs the world and the solar system. Naturally, that opposition acts not only upon those great adepts, but upon us, their humble followers. So what we're saying, it is totally normal to feel the dark powers when you have been exalted in the light. We just have to be ready for it and be ready to beat them at their game. I do not wish to devote much space to these people in this book. I have written of them at considerable length in talks on the path of occultism. I have little to add to what is there stated, except to say that one theory on which they justify to themselves their amazing proceedings is that the Logos does not really wish for union, that his intention in evolution is the development of each individual to the highest possible level. You will note, by the way, though, they would never admit it, that level is not very high after all, because their scheme keeps them working at the strengthening of the ego and will not carry them on to the Buddhic and nirvanic planes, which are planes of union. They say, "You think you see about you signs of evolution towards union. You think that that is the will of the Logos. On the contrary, that is a temptation which the Logos is putting in your way. Instead of wanting you to become one, he wants you to assert your individuality in spite of all this which tempts you to be absorbed into an undistinguished unity. So that's what the dark powers say to you. People who really believe that find themselves in conflict with us and with our masters at every point and all the way through, we follow our own masters, who know much more about the will of the Logos than anyone taking that wrong line can ever come to know, because they can attain union with him, which is impractical for the advocates of separateness. Therefore it comes that these men oppose us. They attempt to obtain recruits. Like everyone else, they want to convert others to their own opinions. And if we are developing and refining ourselves a little more than the average man in some ways, we are the very people of whom they want to get hold. Many of the more intellectual of them are as little enmeshed in materiality as any great ascetic. They quite agree that man should put aside lower things and aim at the higher, but they aim at an intensified individuality which in the end can only come to grief. So they are very likely to try to influence us, to intensify the individuality in us, to awaken a subtle conceit in us. Remember that it is part of their creed to be utterly unscrupulous. To them, scrupulosity would seem a foolish and despicable weakness, so they will play the meanest tricks. What makes sense about this paragraph may be what you have already read or about to read, but the very basic and fundamental principle is that in the West, we see our individuality, we see our uniqueness, we see our separateness, we are who we are. People have big egos, and they don't have many, many centuries of Eastern thought and teaching where we are all one, and we are one together, for instance, in a mandala. And if we thought of ourselves in that mandala sitting here in this court, we would feel, as I think most of us feel in the first place, that we are one, and that our strength is in our union, and that the merging of our talents and the calling upon the talents of one another is the extraordinary event of the century, of having a community of the Holy Spirit in the West, where people, to some extent, not to the entire extent, but to some proportion of their beings, give that portion of themselves to the unity of the whole. Whereas if we're out in the world and we're talking to people, they're wonderful people, and we meet all kinds of people all over the place. But to be part of a community, it instantly strikes a note that says, what do I have to give up? Am I going to give up my identity? I'm going to follow some guru, that kind of thing. But you go to India and the Far East, it's just commonplace. So that's where the East is in advance of ourselves. Somehow we fear this loss of this great independence that Saint Germain has given us, and he only gave us that independence so that we could surrender it back to him at a future time when in our spiritual paths we are not threatened by becoming one cell in the body of the whole of many cells. So there is one of our special dangers. The more advanced we can become, the better prey we should be for these brothers of the shadow if they could get hold of us. But they cannot get hold of us, they cannot touch us, as long as we keep ourselves in full community of thought with our masters. As long as we can keep ourselves steadfastly along the line of unselfishness, of the constant outpouring of love. So selfishness is ultimately our Achilles heel and our point of vulnerability, because we're thinking of ourselves and not of the whole. Our strength against these darker powers is our union with our masters, and our power to keep ourselves in their attitude, open always towards influences from above, but resolutely closed against all separate agencies which may try to affect us. Anything which tends to accentuate separateness is simply playing into the hands of the enemy. All our strength is in our union. That's the point of this. And this is true in small things as well as in those which we think greater. So we must put aside all silly little jealousies and animosities. Every time that we yield ourselves to them, we make ourselves weak spots in the theosophical citadel, breaches in its defenses. Each time we indulge our lower nature by letting it have a gleeful little orgy of pride and spite, of feeling itself offended by some perfectly innocent brother, we are to just that extent traitors to our own masters. That's a very strong word. We don't think of ourselves as traitors to El Morya, but we are traitors to him when we are offensive to a brother. We might think surely our masters will save us from any such downfall as that. They will not, because they cannot interfere with our liberty. We must learn to stand alone. Besides, we do not want to give our masters the trouble of watching over us as a nurse watches over a little toddling child. The adepts are the busiest people in the world. They deal with egos in blocks. They deal with souls by the million, not with personalities one by one. Still, if in real extremity one calls upon a master, a response certainly comes. We should be very sorry to cause the master even that moment's trouble if we could possibly help it. But when really necessary, the aid does come. In the early days of this society, while Madame Blavatsky was still alive, we had a member who was in many ways a man of tremendous power. If he had chosen to become a black magician, he would have been a very effective specimen. Sometimes he was slightly unscrupulous. He had a passion for knowledge. He would have done almost anything, even something a little shady, to gain further information. He was a doctor of medicine, and in attending upon one of our members, he discovered her to be a clairvoyant of rather rare powers in certain ways. Finding this, when she was convalescent, he asked her to join him in certain experiments. He said to her quite openly on the physical plane, "You have a very wonderful power. If you will allow me to mesmerize you, to put you into a trance, I am sure that you can attain heights which I myself can never touch. And in that way we should gain much knowledge which at present is out of our reach." So we compromise the law because we will gain knowledge. And the end justifies the means. The lady refused, I think quite rightly, for such domination is a most dangerous thing and should certainly not be undertaken except under exceptional conditions and with elaborate safeguards. At any rate, she refused absolutely. The doctor was very much dissatisfied and declined to take no for an answer, but for the time he went away. That same night he materialized in her bedroom and began to attempt mesmeric passes. Whatever those are. Not unnaturally, she was intensely angry. She felt a great sense of flaming outrage that he should dare to intrude upon her, that he should try to force upon her what she had definitely and after due consideration declined. And she set herself to fight against his influence with all her strength. But she quickly realized that her mental power was nothing as compared to his, that her will was being slowly but surely overborne. So knowing that she was fighting a losing battle, she called upon her master, the Master Kuthumi, for help. The result was not only instantaneous, but it astonished her beyond words. Remember that she was filled with the most violent and passionate sense of outrage. In a flash, in a moment, as she made the call, she saw the doctor disappearing in the far distance. That was perhaps not quite so wonderful, but what struck her, what she never forgot, was that in one moment her whole feeling was absolutely changed. The anger was gone, the sense of outrage was gone, and all that she felt towards the disappearing doctor was profound regret that a man who had such wonderful power should misuse them in that way. So you see, when there is a real extremity, help is at hand. But I think none of us will call for it unless we are absolutely forced to do so. When there is a real extremity, help is at hand. That's one of those signs you put up on your wall. Because sometimes we are in dire extremes of burdens, and we don't make the call. We don't say, "El Morya, come here right now, I need you." And he's just waiting for the call, or Archangel Michael's waiting for the call. So know when you're in dire straits, and know to let your voice box work and make that call. Think of others and not of yourself. Think of loyalty and love to your master and how you can serve him best by spreading his influence among your brethren. Then you need not be afraid that you will lose instead of gaining by any wonderful inspiration that has come to you. The certainty of success. The pupil must make up his mind that with regard to his effort towards self-improvement, he will never allow himself to be discouraged by failure, even though it be often repeated. No matter how many times you fail, do not be discouraged. However many times he may have failed in his effort, however many falls he may have on the path which he sets before himself, there is exactly the same reason for getting up and going on after the 1,000th fall than there was after the first. In the physical plane, there are many things which are frankly impossible, but that is not the case in the higher worlds. We cannot lift a ton weight without machinery, but in the higher worlds it is possible with perseverance to lift the weight of our many imperfections. The reason for this is obvious if we think. Human muscles are not so constructed as to be able to lift a ton, and no conceivable training of them could enable them to do it, because the force behind them is limited. In spiritual matters, the man has behind him the whole divine power on which he can draw. The whole divine power. Go out tonight and look at the stars and think of the whole divine power that you have access to. In spiritual matters, the man has behind him the whole divine power on which he can draw, and so little by little and by repeated efforts, he will become strong enough to overcome any obstacle. Any obstacle. People often say, I can deal with things on the physical, but on the astral and mental I can do very little. It is so difficult. That is the reverse of the truth. They are not accustomed to thinking and working in that finer matter, and so they believe that they cannot. But as soon as their will is set, they will find that things will follow the direction of that will in a way impossible in the physical world. Some pupils have found themselves much helped in this work by the use of a talisman or amulet. That may be a very real aid, since the physical nature has to be dealt with and brought into subjection, as well as the mind and the emotions, and it is without doubt the hardest to influence. A talisman, strongly charged with magnetism for a particular purpose, by someone who knows how to do it, may be an invaluable help, as I have explained at considerable length in the hidden side of things. Many people hold themselves superior to such aids and say that they need no help, but for myself, I have found the task so arduous that I am glad to avail myself of any assistance that may be offered to me. And that is the end of the chapter, Acceptance by the Master. So, how has El Morya accepted us? In what ways do we know that he has accepted us? In what ways do we not know? To me, the answer to the question is to serve well, to put all of your life into the work, to love the masters, to love one another. And as we read earlier in this book, always the work, always initiating the work, not having to be told what to do. Doing what you know is right and doing it with love. It's just a very simple formula. Everybody knows what's right. Everybody has a conscience. Everybody has a holy Christ self. I think we somehow think we're out of touch. We don't think that in this very moment, as we make our calls, that the answer is already forthcoming. So then we start trying to solve our problems in a very human way. And we get deeper and deeper into that human consciousness that we have to do the whole thing. We can't possibly do the whole thing. But the heavens are opened to us, and my goal is to launch chelas to become ascended masters. That's my goal. That's why I'm sitting here. That's what I envision for you. And the launching of a chela who becomes an ascended master, there's a fine tuning, there is a refinement, and if I could ever figure out how to do this, I would keep you around me for so many days or weeks so that I could get to the core of what is hindering you from flying higher and being stronger and having that sense that you're soaring to the sun, you're soaring to God. And there just are no blocks except the ones we create. There are no blocks to this process. But some of us can't see, We don't know, we don't realize that we are moving in that direction, that God wants us home on a certain day and date. Do you realize that? God has a timetable for you. There's a certain day and date in your life when you have to be ready. What are you going to do if you're not ready? So it's going to happen. It's going to happen in this life if you just put all the pieces together. Just put all the pieces together and have that tremendous confidence. When you know in your heart and your soul that you are right with God, then no devil or demon can convince you that you are not worthy. Whether there's something bothering you, or you need therapy, or you need to do this or that, go after it. Because when you get to the heights, as this chapter said, there is enormous temptation and a tremendous battle that you have to fight and win. Gautama Buddha fought that battle, Jesus Christ, all the great avatars, they've all fought that battle. They've descended to hell, they've come back, and they've done what they had to do. Somehow we lose this. We lose it. So that's why I'm doing Darshan every week, because I don't want you to lose this thread, that you are going to be immortal within the next 20 years, 40 years, 50 years. You're going to be up there. But we've got some launching to do down here. You've got to get rid of some baggage. We have to be light as a feather when we enter the kingdom of God. Last time I was here, we left off with 3 or 4 men. Are they working today? Are they ready to speak? Alex, come on forward.
Good evening, Mother, and good evening, everyone else.
Hi, Alex.
I first learned about the Ascended Masters when I was in high school. I went to Linden High School in Linden, New Jersey, and my art teacher was talking to another English teacher about Venus while she was drinking carrot juice. And I said, "You mean Venice, don't you?" "No," she said, "I mean Venus." And then she started telling me about the Ascended Masters in the Summit Lighthouse.
Who was she?
Dorothy Smith.
Dorothy Smith.
You remember her?
This goes way back.
It does. My first conference was in 1963 at the Dodge House in Washington, D.C., and I asked the lady at the registration desk how much the registration was. And she was Mark's first secretary. And her name was Crystal Anderson, and she told me that it was $5, but that I could give as my Holy Christ self-directed. Well, at that time I was a starving student and only lived on rice and veggies, so I gave her $4, but then I thought better about it later on. So everything looked very familiar to me when I went to my first conference. I noticed a crystal display in the shape of a heart with a pink rose inside of it in front of the podium. And I asked one of the staff members where it came from, and they told me that Mark had designed it. During one lunch, I ate with a staff member and asked him what it was like to be on staff. And I ended up paying for both our lunches because he said that he didn't have enough money. Well, little did I know that one day later on I was going to take his place on staff, which was quite interesting. In the spring of 1965, I decided to join staff, but made the mistake of telling my family and my art teacher about it. My family was shocked, and my mother told me that a great job offer had just come in the mail. My art teacher told me that my parents had worked so hard to put me through school that it would just break their hearts if I threw away my career and joined staff. So I tried working out in the world longer, but the ache in my heart continued. And I remembered that when I first started in college, that Jesus had come to me and told me that you are one. And I responded, yes, I know, but I have to experience the world. So as the months progressed, my desire became stronger, and I called out Beacon's Head in Vienna, Virginia, and Mark answered the phone. And I asked him if I could come out to Beacon's Head, and he said, "You mean you want to join staff?" And I told him that I wanted to try it out for a week to give us all a chance to see how it would work out. So I went there for a week, and Mother and Mark asked me to join staff, and Mother asked me if I could make a 2-year commitment, and I said that I would go home and think about it for a week and then give an answer. At that time, there were only 6 staff members. 1 week later, I called up Beacon's Head and told Mark that I decided to join staff, and that was 31 years ago. There were a few reasons that I joined staff. One was that I had seen a snapshot of myself when I graduated from college, and I had seen myself in a new light. that I looked like I had a spiritual mission and that my mission was upon me. And then there were other times that I would see a snapshot of myself and I saw my dweller and I knew I had more work to do. Another reason was after finishing Jesus Watch, I had a vision of New York City going down in cataclysm. And the Summit Lighthouse had also sent out a newsletter showing the new mansion they had purchased in Colorado Springs with all the private bedrooms. And I thought how nice it would be to have my own room. I guess you know what I'm going to say next. Well, little did I know that I would eventually be living in the dormer of the attic with 20 men and with a nice little button under my pillow connected to a burglar alarm that would go off every night. Mark said that he would have a staff member come by the next day to pick up my things and that I would be going on a trip with him around the country to various Summit Lighthouse groups. I had one day to pack up all my things, and I learned that the masters worked very quickly. And so it began. In Boston, I learned the lesson that if your heart is impure, that your gift is not acceptable. When the Summit Lighthouse group leader continued to pledge his support to the Bridge to Freedom, when he knew that it was no longer an authentic channel of the brotherhood. And when Mark asked him why he was continuing to support it, he said to save face. Therefore, later on, when he sent Mark flowers for the lecture that Mark was going to give but did not attend, his flowers wilted within 1 hour. And so I asked Mark, why did his flowers wilt? And he said, because his heart was not pure. In Buffalo, the group there was a combination of the I Am movement and the Summit Lighthouse. At each place setting was a live pink rose. And after the lecture and dictation that Mark gave, there was a tremendous release of light, which I always remembered. At another occasion, and later on in Detroit, the group leader there asked Mark if he would like to go to a concert. He had tickets to a concert that night, and Mark said certainly he would go. And after the concert, the group leader asked Mark how he liked it, and he said that the violinist had played from the human ego. And later on, after Mark had given his lecture, he asked the group leader what he thought of it, and the group leader started to criticize it. And Mark was just totally humble through the whole experience. Several travel incidences with Mark stand out in my memory. On our way to Detroit, we stopped at a motel to rest, and Mark wanted me to find out from the manager the best way to get to our destination. I asked the manager, but did not find out what kind of a road was in store for us. The road that started out as a nice paved one changed to gravel and then to dirt. And the road that started out that way also had streams periodically across it. And when it became dirt, there were only logs that was good enough for a two-wheel vehicle. However, we had a three-wheel vehicle behind us, and it was used for storing things for the trip. And it never occurred to me how we got over these little streams when there was only two logs on either side of a road. And during that time, Mark was very upset with me and said that I have almost aborted the mission to get to Detroit for a particular lecture and dictation. So I still don't know how we got over that. The streams with only two logs with a three-wheeler behind us. On another trip to Southern California, in the Trafco that Mark drove, the vehicle suddenly died along the highway. And Mark determined what the problem was under the hood and was very concerned about how it would get fixed because he knew that it was a very difficult problem and very few people were trained. And without thinking, I suddenly said to Mark, "Oh, don't worry, I'll find someone to fix it." And I jumped out of a Trafco and started trying to hitch a ride. And the first person who came by in a motorcycle gave me a ride and wanted to know where I wanted to go. And I told him the problem, and this particular person was on his day off and happened to be the perfect person to fix the problem under the hood, came back and fixed the problem, and we were on our way. And that was really a leap of faith for all of us. It always amazed me also how well Mark could pack a trunk of a car. I would try to pack this trunk and have the hardest time, and he would come along and say, "Oh, it's no problem." And he would put all the pieces of luggage in the trunk, and it would all fit like a glove, and there would be absolutely no space to spare. That's true, too. Since I was on unemployment at the time when I first joined the church, my unemployment payments went from Mark's salary because the church didn't have much money. And even on a good day when Mark and I went to Washington, D.C. post office, there'd be $100. And my father was very upset when I told him that I wouldn't be coming home for Thanksgiving because in the process we were moving the church from Beacon's Head to Colorado Springs. And so people could not be spared. And he said that if he found out that Mark Prophet wasn't paying me, that he would put him in jail. One day at La Tourelle, Mark wanted to leave for a week for some healing, and he asked me to pack up some things. And he was going to see a chiropractor in Sioux City, Iowa. When he was packed up to go, he said, "Let's go." And, well, I didn't know that I was going on this trip, and I wasn't packed. So I had 1/2 hour to pack up, and somebody helped me, and out we went. And where we went to was Sioux City for 2 days, and we were enjoying ourselves when suddenly Mark was lying down on his bed, and he told me that his right side was paralyzed from the shoulder down. And I told him in my amazement that I had exactly the same symptoms. He then told me that this was a manifestation of witchcraft, and that it was as though there was a grid over the city with a blip of bright light. And his presence was discovered by the sinister force. And then he said we'd have to get up and move, and that's exactly what we did. We couldn't stay there. And that was a pattern that was to be continued later on other trips. And Mark was very astute at picking up on vibrations of electronic belt substance. And he told me that Elizabeth is also very accurate. And once, while Mark and I were driving north in Colorado Springs toward the Air Force Academy, he received a message from La Tourelle on his car radio, and it was KPE 2158. Do you copy? And Mark answered, "Yes, I copy. What is your message?" And once again, it was KPE 2158, and all you heard was the noise that a radio has, and there was no answer. So Mark went back to La Tourelle, 15 miles away, and walked down in the basement to the mailroom, and talked to the lady and asked her why she had not given the message. And she replied that she did not know that he had heard her. And he told her in the future to just give the message if there was no response. And instead of taking this kindly, she was filled with a little self-justification and said that she had worked her finger to the bone all afternoon, cleaning the shelves of the mailroom, and this was the thanks that she got. And Mark simply said, "Your karma be upon you." And as God is my witness, it appeared as though dust settled from the ceiling of the mailroom on the shelves that she had worked so hard to clean all afternoon. And she took one look at those shelves, and she started crying, and she went up to her room. But it taught me a lesson that, if your vibration is wrong, you could work your finger to the bone, and it's probably not an acceptable offering to God. One day, Mark, Sean, and I went to Furr's Cafeteria in Colorado Springs for lunch, and Sean was about 6, and I was supposed to be taking care of him, but was not paying much attention to him. I was instead distracted and just eating my lunch. And Mark told me to be more attentive. Instead of doing just that, I said I thought Sean was old enough to take care of himself. That turned out not to be the right answer. So Mark once again said, very simply, "Your karma be upon you." And so I waited to see what was going to happen. But I didn't have to wait long. Within a few seconds, my glass of water tipped over on my table and all over my lap. But it taught me a lesson. On another occasion, Mark asked me to go with him to give 2 staff members a final opportunity to turn around and serve the light. When it was obvious that they would not listen to him, he shook the dust off his feet and left their trailer. And they had both come down with mono. Several days later, I was serving milk to Mark in his office at La Tourelle when suddenly the milk slipped out of my hands and spilled all over the floor. He took one look at me and said that I had mono. And he was correct, and it took me 6 weeks to fully recover. And I will never forget the great compassion of his heart as I lay in bed recovering. and he bent down one day and gave me a great big hug. It's one of those rare moments that you never forget. One afternoon when I was preparing a mailing to go to the post office, Mark asked me to go with him into town. And I said, just a minute. Shouldn't have said that. And he said, forget it. That he would just go find somebody else to go. Well, I learned from this experience to drop everything I was doing and to obey immediately. And that was something I never forgot. And because of my close proximity to Mark, he was able to pummel me, chastise me. And many staff meetings occurred because of something I had done or failed to do. The subject could be that I had forgotten to have his pink shirt back from the laundry on Monday, to my banking in a bank separate from the church, or to my not remembering which foot I had just massaged the night before because the hours were so late that I had fallen asleep. That's true. After a while, I began to feel that I was being picked on from the human standpoint. Mark read my mind, but Mother gave me the answer. And she told me that I was getting my Chela and that I had to learn not to take it personally. In fact, after Mark passed on, Mother told me that Chela was the highest form of love. And I still remember that. It meant a lot to me at that time. It still does. Over the years, I've come to know this highest form of love through serving our beloved messengers, Mark and Elizabeth Prophet, and the purposes of the Great White Brotherhood. I'll never forget the closeness and love that we all shared at La Tourelle with our beloved messengers serving with us, and the beauty of the place, the focuses of light, and there was also a simulated violet flame in the fireplace in the back of the room, and everybody was dressed in white for a Sunday service. And after the Sunday morning dictation, we would go outside and walk along the edge of the property to anchor the light from the dictation. And then you could hear the bells from the Will Rogers Shrine up above the property on the side of Cheyenne Mountain. Before I had joined staff, I was inspired to buy an 8-foot gilded ornate frame in New York before I joined staff for $35. And I knew it was for a future focus of light, but I didn't know where it was going to go. And it was used in the foyer of La Tourelle with a mirror inserted in it and was just about the right size. With our move to Pasadena came a big jump for our church. From a mansion, we went to a 12-acre campus with leased buildings to house all our activities. We even had a library building with all our books there for people to read. Then came the ashram in Camelot. With so many buildings to furnish and decorate came the challenges to be frugal. So we needed carpet for the altar at Camelot and the sacristy. And I was able to find violet wool carpet at $2 a yard at closeout. And the carpet for the sacristy came from an ad in the paper, as did many other items. And it taught me that if you have a desire for the church to be outpictured that is lawful, God will help you outpicture it. And the lesson was brought home to me many times afterwards. For instance, Mother one day told me that she needed a frame for a large Shiva print, and that I couldn't spend any more money than $29, and that the right one existed, and that I would find it. And I did, by God's grace. So I went to an antique shop, and there in the corner was the beautiful gilded antique frame. The owner told me that it was $29, and it was the right size. On another occasion, I was able to find through the newspapers a crystal candelabra for the church, and it looked very impressive, but it was $29. So I found through the years of working for the church that when a need arises, someone has to come forward and fill that need. Many times I look around and see a need and no one coming forth to fill it, so I would do it myself. For instance, in Pasadena, I was in charge of correspondence department, security, special assignments at the same time. Special assignments were for such things as decorating the gym when we were, which was behind the auditorium for special events like a Camelot ball. Everyone came dressed up as a lady or a knight of a court of Camelot to balance the karma for the fall of Camelot. And it needed a backdrop, so I was able to get a backdrop from Hollywood, and also staff built props, and we had very short time to do it. I think we spent most of the night, and it was done on time. And then we also started a banner committed at Camelot. We had banners on both sides of the entrance up the drive for the opening day of Camelot and other special events to bring the feeling of Camelot and to give a kind of a visual that people responded to. What I found out was that if I was willing to stretch to do these jobs and do my best, that I would get assistance from God. And during this time, I found the presence of Linnell, the ever-present guru, to be indeed ever-present. For instance, when Mother had a seminar in Philadelphia many years ago, I was responsible for her security, and directly following a dictation, everyone started walking out of the auditorium to be met by fundamentalists who were determined to engage us in argumentation and prevent us from leaving the building, and also to destroy the light that was created. Almost instantly, I felt Linnell's presence and the inspiration to sing, "I Am the Violet Flame." And that's exactly what we did. And they were basically helpless to move against us and gave up, and we did not have any more problems with them. On one occasion, when I was working part-time in Colorado Springs as a clerk in a department store, a contest was held among the employees of 8 stores to see who could get the most charge card applications. The prize was a mink coat. I decided then and there that if the masters wanted me to get out of debt so that I could work full-time on staff, then I would win the contest. With Linnell's help, that's exactly what happened. Next day, I asked my doctor, which I had a large bill with, if a mink coat would be an acceptable payment on my bill, and asked him what size coat his wife wore. So he said, yes, size 8. From that day forward, I started getting charge applications, but the sinister force tried to prevent it. I went into one shopping center and was stopped by the police. It seemed that someone the night before had poured gasoline in front of several outside doors with the intent of burning down the building. A call was made to verify who I was and that this contest was legitimate. I went on to win this contest, and the doctor's wife was very happy with her coat. The bill being paid, I went back to working on staff full-time, and I give God and Linnell the full credit for the victory. Another example of the sinister force preempting the victory was before I was knighted by Saint Germain. I was knighted Sir Bernard because of serving Mark like a faithful dog. Glory to God. But I have to tell you this for a reason. Shortly before this event, I was in California with Mark at the home of a daughter of a staff member. This is an interesting story, and it taught me a lesson. She was not in the teachings and observed me following Mark around. So she remarked to me in a disdainful manner, "Why, you follow him around like a dog." She actually told me this before I was knighted. For whatever reason, it had no impact on me except as a lesson later that the sinister force will try to thwart your victories on the path, and especially before you're right about to have a big victory. So be on guard. More recently, when I was working out several years ago in Livingston, I became aware of certain unethical activities that were transpiring and prayed for a solution. It became very obvious to me that if I remained silent about this, that a story might hit the newspapers that keepers of a church were involved in unethical business dealings, which would be a bad reflection on the church. And at that time, the church was in the headlines almost every day in a very negative manner. It was a difficult situation and decision for me because at stake were the jobs of keepers as well as my own. But I could feel Linnell's presence on this, and I knew that I had to act. The result was a chastisement from El Moria and the removal of this business from this area and the loss of jobs to many keepers. And to this day, some of these keepers do not fully understand what happened and blame me for what occurred. Nonetheless, this experience taught me that when something is wrong and you have the prompting of your Holy Christ self or masters, you must be true to yourself or lose the sponsorship of the master, and you have to pay the price. Recently, I had a death in my family, which has taught me how sacred life is and how important the path is. Everyone is called home sometime, and the important thing is to make the most of our opportunity while there is time. And don't make the mistake of taking for granted this path, this messenger, or these teachings, or this community, but support it with all of your heart. And I do thank Mother and Linnell for all of your blessings and your support, and for all of the teachings and training I have received. I am truly grateful. Thank you.
Alex, I'm profoundly grateful. You are truly a pillar in this community, and I'm sure you remember that little brochure, The Summit Lighthouse, a World Pillar.
Thank you, Mother.
And that's what Alex has been all these years. Absolutely steady, immovable, and right there with vanilla.
Thank you.
Hi, Mother.
Hi, William.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to respond to comments that Mother made week before last in the Darshan concerning El Moria and responding to his call, and also the idea that he's a gruff master, or that he's a stern master and one to be feared. I have certainly a strong experience and testimony to the contrary. And El Moria starts in my life, although I didn't know it at the time. When I was 18, I embarked upon the spiritual path, and soon into the path, I realized the importance of the will of God and committed myself and devoted myself to the will of God. Soon after that, I received a vision that I needed to prepare myself to be able to assist in building the community of the Holy Spirit. I had no idea where that would be or how it would be, but I listened and began to pursue it in some ways. You know, it wasn't even a conscious thing necessarily that I set out, okay, now this year I'm going to do this and next year I'm going to do that. It was more like the invisible hand guiding me. And I worked in construction and pursued the profession of construction and was successful there, and then was guided in some way to go on to engineering school. And so I did that, and had to give up. You know, there were many financial opportunities and temptations. Like Alex was saying, that there's the force will rise against you, and it will try to thwart you at specific times, and right when there's an opportunity to make a victory. And my victories were in the form of giving up something that was comfortable to me and that I was accomplished at doing in order to go on and do something else. And so I went to engineering school, and then after engineering school I was guided into the profession of engineering and doing things that were at the face of it I didn't know anything about or care to get into, specifically the nuclear power industry. But later on, as I look back on it and realizing that what that did for me was help prepare me to do the design of the shelters, because there are very substantial similarities. And so this invisible hand was guiding me, even though I wasn't aware of what it was. I was sensitive to my inner calling, and so I continued to follow it. And when I would get a prompting to do something, I would go and do it, whether it was something that I didn't even care to do. Specifically, in one case, when I was graduating from engineering school, as many of you know, there are like job placement agencies on campus, and people will come, or the representatives from the various companies will come. Well, there was a representative from the local power utility who was coming on campus, and it was the kind of a job that would be very good and very attractive, and there were a lot of people wanting to apply. And I was somewhat environmentalist in my ilk, and was disturbed with the power utility for a lot of the things that they were doing. And I said, I'm not going to work for them. I don't even want to apply. I don't even want to interview with them. And so I happened to go down there one day, and the list for Duke Power, this power company, was totally full, and there was no place on it. And while I was standing there looking at the list, the lady took it out from in front of me and scratched a name off. And it happened to be right at a time when I had a break. You know, senior year, you don't have any time to do too many things anyway, and so, I was full and maxed. But this lady scratched the name off the list and laid it back down. And I said, why did you do that? She said, the person just called up and canceled, and it happened to be right at a time the following day when I had a break. So I said, okay, I'll come and interview. And I did so and ended up getting a job which guided me into an entire career in the nuclear power industry, which turned out to be very beneficial. In August of 1980, I became a keeper of the flame, and that was another the hand of God at work, in that I'd known about Mother and Mark for a number of years, probably since the Kuthumi and Dwal Kul books, even before that though, but when Kuthumi and Dwal Kul Aura books came out, I knew the Summit Lighthouse as a good and reputable and authoritative publisher of books, and I knew Mother and Mark and recognized them as really writing the truth, but I had no inclination about the church or even any desire to find out about it. And so I was at work one day, and I took a friend. He was talking to me about spiritual things, and I was talking to him about some questions that he had, and so I took him to a bookstore nearby where we worked and bought him Climb the Highest Mountain. And I said, so in the process of talking to him about it and giving him the book, a card fell out of it. And so I said, here, I'll tell you what, you take the book and I'll take the card. So I took the card and I looked at it, and it said, for more information on quarterly conferences, Keepers of the Flame, Summit University, and it named a bunch of things. And I said, I don't know about any of these things, so I wrote my name on it, and I said, God, just send me what I need. So I flipped it in the mailbox, and a couple weeks later, I got back a Keeper of the Flame brochure. There was no thank you letter in it, or there was nothing else in that envelope. And later on, I talked to some people about that, and they said, I can't believe that there wasn't some kind of a message or something in there other than a Keeper of the Flame brochure. And I said, well, that's all I asked for. So I fully expected that that's what I got. And so when I read the brochure, I said, wow, this is great to see there are other people doing this too. So it was a matter of just signing up and getting on board and going with it. And by the end of that was in August, and by December, I got a call from a company in California who was interested in knowing if I would come to work for them. And so in checking it out a little bit, then I decided I would, and that was St. Germain moving me one step closer, or El Moria moving me one step closer to coming here. And then in the fall of '81, I heard about the ranch, about the inner retreat being purchased and so on, and I realized the light bulb came on. I said, there it is, that's where I need to go. That's what I've been preparing for all this time, and I need to go there. So in the summers of '82 and '83, I combined all of my vacation and days off and all of the time that I had for the year and put it together to come here to work. And in the course of talking to Edward and Mother some on the subject, I said, well, there's no reason for me to come during a conference because I can't get anything done while I'm there. So you just tell me whether you want me to come before the conference or after. So in '82, I came before the conference, and in '83, I came after the conference. And sometime in there, I heard a teaching from Mother where she said that when a person commits themselves to the will of God, El Moria immediately comes to that person. And I realized as I look back on it that El Moria was very tenderly and guiding me as a loving father through the preparations that I needed to be here and to be prepared to be here. So at the end of when I was here, the summer of '82, it was right at the end of August, and I was getting ready to leave to go home the next day. And then Mother called me in to see her, and basically gave me a mandate, said that we're serious about building the ranch, and we're serious about making a community here, and that they needed the people who were going to be able to be here and work and help get it done, And so for that reason, I needed to be here. And so I said, well, you know, I knew at some time I was going to come on staff or to be here more, but I didn't expect such an abrupt, interaction with Mother on the subject. And so I said, well, Mother, this is going to make some real big changes in my life. She says, I know that. And that's just something that you have to weigh out. And I said, okay, well, I'll give it serious thought. So I left the ranch and went back to San Jose where I was living and thought about it for a few days and decided that this is what I needed to do. And so I was in communication with Edward on the subject, and so I called him and said, okay, I've decided I'm going to come. There's some things I'm going to have to do. I'm going to have to work it out. But I had some property in California and so on that I had to do something with. So I said, okay, I'll work it out and I'll be there. And shortly after that time, El Morey appeared to me. It was just a brief kind of a glimpse, but he was smiling. And it was something that even as I speak about it right now, it brings it back to my mind very clearly. And the whole teaching that I had heard not long before about El Morey coming to a person and guiding a person who commits themselves to the will of God it just like all came into fruition, for me at that point. And so it took me 6 weeks from the time Mother talked to me until I was here on staff. That was the middle of October of '83 when I came here. And I've been here ever since. So it's over 13 years now that I've been here accelerating at the feet of the masters and under some very specific and direct tutelage of Mother and certainly the masters over these years. And I find that getting here is a big enough challenge, but staying here is also a challenge in that you have to keep moving and you have to keep accelerating. And I recall Mother giving a lesson one time on what acceleration is. And anybody who knows basic physics knows that acceleration is not going fast. Acceleration is continuing to increase the rate of your velocity. So that means you're not just going faster, but you're going fast, but you're constantly going faster. If you just go fast, then you're not accelerating. So that's important to think about that in terms of us moving forward and attempting to catch up with Mother on her trip to the Great Central Sun. And so I wanted to say, Mother, that
I haven't packed my bags.
well, we all travel toward the sun on many levels, I'm sure. So anyway, I just wanted to, in response to Mother's comments, offer that testimony and express my gratitude, Mother.
William,
Thank
you
you for
gave up a
Darshan.
lot to come here. I know that. And I'm very grateful.
Well, it was my pleasure. Basically, you can't deny the fact when you give up something, but you just have to recognize what it's all worth and what you're gaining. You only get what you pay for in one way or another. So.
And there's only one door you can walk through.
It's true.
God makes it easy for us. He only gives us one door.
That's right. Thank you for this opportunity, Mother.
Thank you, William.
Thank you, community. God bless you.
Good evening, Mother and friends. I want to start my testimony by talking about Alex. This happened, I don't know, maybe a couple years ago. I come into the court and went into the restroom there, and the sinks were dirty. And there was Alex washing the sinks. He says, we can't have this. And he just washing the sinks. The next thing I want to testify to is the elementals, an elemental experience I had. This took place at the head of the Spring Creek holler there, where the Spring Creek comes out of the hills. This happened in 1982, I think it was. And I was wandering around up there for some reason or another, and I walked into the aura of this elemental. And the best way I can describe it is I came up to about his knees, you know. Pretty good size fella, you know.
Yeah, it's big.
And-
That's big.
You know, I looked up, I says, hi, you know. So anyway, I just kind of wandered on doing what I was doing. I stopped and I said, wait a minute, maybe he wanted something, you know. So I went back and he was still there. And I asked him what he wanted. And he, in consciousness, took me into the mountain where they have an altar there. And it was like our altar here. One thing, they didn't have candles on the altar. So at that time, what I did was I called my twin flame. And we lit candles on the altar there for that elementals. And it was interesting that during the shelter cycle, we were hauling up the hill, snow, night, day, everything. So I called this elemental to be up on the big mountain, up the big hill there. And every time I would go up that hill, I would call to him, and I would get a chant going. Push the truck up the hill, I am that I am, you know, and it just continuous like that. I never got stuck. But you know, what I realized was I could kind of perceive them setting up on the hill, but they wouldn't come till I asked them to. But when I'd ask them, they'd come and push the truck up the hill, you know, and we'd go on our way. So that took place for quite a long time. And other people were getting hung up and stuck and having a terrible time. But I never did get stuck going up that hill. But one thing I wanted to really testify to is that I came on staff in 1976. I came to Camelot for the where we were the summer work program at Camelot. And I came with, the best way I can just say it, is desires in my heart. And I can truthfully say, as I've contemplated this time, that every desire of my heart had been fulfilled in my time here. Now, my wife and I are getting ready to go back to St. Louis, and I really want to, the best way I can say it is that I can't conceive of having lived a life without meeting the people that I met, past and present, in this community. I have relatives in St. Louis, but you know, I'm more comfortable with the people that I've met here. I could go to New York or Minneapolis or Seattle or Los Angeles or San Francisco or wherever, and I would have a family there of people that I've walked with in this time. And I would be welcome. Doors would be open. They would do whatever I needed, you know. And those, so it's really been an experience of a lifetime. The next thing I want to witness to is El Moria, and this is in the building of the study group in St. Louis, or the focus. I was involved in the building of that focus there. And when we decided to build this focus, to build this, it's a storefront, little storefront. You understand, St. Louis is a focus of the heart chakra. It's not the heart chakra of the country, Mother said. It's Chicago is that, but it's a focus of the secret chamber of the heart. So it's kind of like the Mexican people, like, you know, mañana, you know, laid back, we'll do it tomorrow, you know, this type of thing. So when we got started, when we finally, it was really difficult. You know, I knew it was time to get things going. We wrote our letter to El Moria, and in the precipitation of this study, of this focus, we would have a problem, and we would write El Moria, and he would answer physically in less than 24 hours. I mean, I'll give you an example. You know, there wasn't many of us. We didn't have a lot of money. So the city said we had to rewire this thing, you know. So we called this Christian fundamentalists, you know, thought maybe. And he wanted $900 plus the materials. And he wrote El Moria, we don't have $900, you know, where are we going to get that at? The next day, a guy called up and says, I'll do it for $300 and I'll provide the materials. Yeah, okay. This is a really interesting situation because there was Stephen Love, as many of you know, him and his family, his father, and about 4 other young people were involved with the Esophageal Society and the I Am movement as well. And then they found the Summit Lighthouse, you know. And so they wanted to make this switch. And Stephen kept saying, well, what should I do? And I said, write El Moria, you know. And he told me later, he says, I'd say, write El Moria and giggle, you know. So he said he finally did it. Wrote El Moria. You know, what should I do? Well, Stephen and Norman, Stephen's father, had been the support of that whole, of the Theosophical Society. I mean, they built the focus that they had there. So he wrote El Moria. The next day, there was a note on the board saying they're closing down the focus because of lack of interest. And El Moria moved the furniture, the rug, carpet off the floor, the heating unit, the heater, everything just fit right into our focus. Just moved it right in. You know, you know, it just fit perfect. You know, I mean, it was really an incredible experience to observe El Moria. I mean, it was, you know, we watched it happen. Basically, is what we did. And a guy came in. He was a professional painter, so we had to paint the place. So he was going to. So he would look around and said, oh, yeah, we need to paint this thing, you know. I said, well, how much are you going to charge? He said, oh, I'll do it. I'll just bring my stuff in and paint it. And I says, well, how much paint do we need? He said, oh, I'll provide that too. So he walks in with his professional stuff and sets it up and sprays the place and goes away, you know. So the whole focus was precipitated in this manner. Just one thing after another. The El Moria would provide it. And even the focus itself, the building itself, we wrote him what we wanted. We wanted a building with 2 rooms in it. The next day, the guy called up. Well, Norman knew the guy. He said, "Oh yeah, I got just the place for you," you know. And we walked right in at the price we could afford at that time, you know. So it's like, when we ask, he provided, you know, everything we needed in the focus. So anyway, I want to say thank you.
God bless you. We're going to miss you. Come back to conferences.
I'd love to.
Good.
Plan on it.
Good.
My wife's going to bring you back too.
Hello, Mother.
Hi, Mary Ellen.
Well, I found the teachings in 1970, and it's my privilege to share some of the wonderful stories of things that have happened to me in the process of studying under the Ascended Masters. I had started actually studying Theosophy and Vedanta, and I had been very actively pursuing the Vedanta faith with Ramakrishna, and I was going to become a Vedanta nun. And I got to the point of making a phone call to call Swami Prabhavananda, who was the Swami in Los Angeles, to get my initiation so I could do this. And I remember sitting there with my hand on the phone. It was a rotary phone, and I felt a hand grab my hand, and I felt the message, no, don't do it. There's something better. And it was within a couple of months after that that I found our teachings. So I was always grateful for that hand. It was probably El Moria. In the process of the few weeks before I actually found the teachings, I had a dream one night, and in the dream I was swimming in the ocean. And I swam up to this boat, and I climbed up on board the boat, and I was taken into a room, and the four walls were like diagrams of my four lower bodies. And Mark and Mother were on the boat showing me what I had to do in this life. And of course, I didn't know who they were in the dream, but when I went to the Mother house for the first time, I was stunned because that's who has been in my dream. So it was a great inner sense of knowing that I was in the right place. And there was a violet flame machine on the altar at the Mother house in Santa Barbara. And as soon as I saw that, it somehow took me and transported me to temples and inner experiences that I knew that I'd experienced before. My very first conference, I guess my entities got the better of me, because after the first day, I got in my car and I left, and I drove down by the beach, and I got hysterical. I started crying, and I can't go back to that place. But I thought, no, I have to go back and tell Elizabeth that I'm not coming back. So the next day, I went in, and I don't know if you remember, but you received me in your office in the Mother house, and I said, well, I'm sorry, but I really enjoyed yesterday. I wanted to tell you that I'm leaving and I can't come back. And Mother asked me what the problem was, and I told her a little bit, and she says, oh, well, I can help you with that. And I didn't know anything about clearances or calls or anything like that, but never to this day since that time have I ever had that kind of a hysterical problem again. It was gone. Then it came time for me to join staff, and I had this interesting experience driving along on the way between Santa Barbara, I was from Santa Barbara, to Colorado Springs. I was driving along in tandem with a big moving van, and it had this big blue eagle on the side of it. And every time I changed lanes or passed somebody or whatever, this big moving van would continue to follow right along next to me. And I didn't think anything more of it until I got to La Tourelle, and one of the first things we did was listen to some staff orientation tapes. And in one of those tapes, it said that the mighty blue eagle would escort you to your staff position. So just a couple of stories about Mark. One of my outstanding recollections is having we had a beautiful classroom up the stairs. It had been the girls' bedroom, and it had a violet carpet, and it was painted white. And part of my job was to teach the children and also to clean and keep it clean. And every once in a while, this got to be kind of a regular routine. Mark would walk in, and he'd run his fingers across the top of the door jamb just to see if I cleaned properly. So I really got the message that I had to keep everything really immaculate and clean. One day, I'd been sick a lot, and I guess I wasn't quite in the right vibration, and Mother invited me up to the tower and did a clearance on me and kind of really gave me a reprimand from my substance. And so I was kind of feeling kind of blue, and she says, now you go down to the Four Winds and get a good meal. So I go down to the Four Winds, and there's Mark, and he was just totally jovial, and he gave me a big hug and so glad to see me up and around. And I realized later it was kind of the pull-push of the messengers helping you in every way you could. And over many months, I had a lot of sickness and was in and out of the hospital a couple of times. And one day I looked at myself and realized I hadn't been sick with that kind of illness for 20 years. It was just like it just disappeared over a process of just striving and working that, things that have troubled you for many, many years can just be gone in a flash. One of the interesting things that I've experienced on staff is being asked to do something or assigned to something that is completely outside of what I thought was the realm of what I could do. And one time in Santa Barbara, Mother asked me to try to find some old Spanish period furniture for the Mother house. And I just thought to myself, me, furniture? I don't know the first thing about interior decorating or furniture, nothing. But I took it as something that I had to be obedient to. And I went downtown, and lo and behold, I went to some stores and found some beautiful pieces of old Spanish period furniture. And I got home that afternoon, back to the Mother house, and I went in and told Mother, and she said, oh, I've been out shopping all day and didn't find anything. And so she
came down, and Mark, I guess, either joined you or drove you down to this furniture store. And my outstanding recollection of being in that furniture store and finding this stuff is that Mark stood there and said to the man, well, you know, this little woman is such a good wife. She is a wonderful mother to my children, and because of that, I'm going to buy this furniture. And I thought, this is, whatever reason, this man that was owning the furniture store just needed to hear that, and it was very sweet. Another story, right after Mark's transition, I was taking care of Moira, and we were down in the basement. And in the basement of La Tourelle, there were pigeonholes where we all got our mail. And I was walking by it, and I smelled this very strong smell. And it was like a perfume, and I think it was musk. I may be mistaken. But anyway, later in the day, I went up and I told Mother about it, and she said, well, that was Mark's greeting to all of us. He sent his fragrance through the mailboxes. Another story of Mark, kind of an indirect, my sense of the overshadowing of Llanello. I was in Boston a few years ago, and I had always wanted to go to Longfellow's home. And I asked for directions, and I got completely, utterly lost. I spent about 4 hours in Boston traffic, absolutely lost. And so I basically gave up. And the next morning, I was with some friends and my son. I was taking my son on a prep school trip. And he and his friend wanted to go to Harvard Square. And so I said, okay, we'll take you to Harvard Square and then on the way out of town. So I get the directions how to get to Harvard Square. And we're looking for a place to park. And I'm driving along, you know. I'd completely given up and surrendered the idea of Longfellow's home. Well, it turns out there was a place to park right in front of Longfellow's house. Harvard Square is just a few blocks from it, and I just absolutely knew that Llanello had guided me there. It was very precious, so I sent my son and his friend off to Harvard Square, and I had a tour of the house for the next 3 hours. I have a story to share about El Moria and about, again, being asked to do something and a little bit perhaps beyond oneself. And I was working on Mother's lecture team, and it was for the education of the heart. And you had assigned a lecture on the psychologists leading up to some of the educational theories. And I was working with Murray Steinman, and this was the last lecture of the conference. And it came to be Sunday night, and that lecture hadn't been delivered. And I went to bed thinking that the conference was over, and I didn't have to do the lecture because I hadn't done it yet. Well, Murray knocks on my door at 6:30 or so the next morning. He says, where's the notes? Where's the lecture? And I said, what lecture? And he said, well, didn't you know Mother extended the conference one day? And I said, oh my gosh. So I had all my research done, and I had to get it all and put it together. Well, it was the most intense blitz that I had ever experienced. You couldn't even almost think it through. I just had to put it together. And then when I took it in to show it to Mother, like, you know, it was done at 2:15 and she called for it at 2:30, something like that. She looked it over and said, Mary Ellen, that's some of the best work you've ever done. And I knew that it wasn't me. It had to be El Moria. He put it together. And I guess the last thing I wanted to share is the experience of going through some therapy recently with Marilyn. And I don't remember what the method is called, but where she uses her hand movements and helps you go process some old records. And she mentioned to me that it was sponsored by Kuthumi, and as we've been reading this book and getting closer to Kuthumi's heart, I just wanted to share what an incredible experience it was. I won't go into all the details, but it took me back into a number of embodiments where I had done something that I had felt guilty about for many, many, many years, many, many embodiments. And in the process of going through the records, I could come to a level of self-loathing that I finally got rid of. And I feel like the understanding that pursuing one's psychology, you can't go any further on the path unless you do it. And I just wanted to testify to how powerful, when you're really ready, it's like I'd been building to this, and I'd had several other sessions of therapy over many years, but I really knew that I had to see her, and I had to see her right away. And it was so ready. It all just, within 2 hours, my life changed. And this was about 3 weeks ago, and I can say day after day, I keep one, you know, it's like it's not coming back. I'm truly free of some things that I probably carried for, I can't even tell you how many embodiments. And so the path is ever wondrous, gets more exciting every day, and am so happy to be able to share these stories and to thank you, Mother.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Thank you very much. Almighty God, in the name of El Moria, I pray that these teachings and these testimonies shall reach every light bearer upon earth and draw them to this precious altar of God. Almighty God, cut free all souls of light and bring them to the home of Sanat Kumara, Lord Maitreya's mystery school, Gautama Buddha's heart, beloved Padmasambhava, beloved Jesus Christ. With all of our hearts, we dedicate our energies, beginning this evening and throughout the Thanksgiving Day, on behalf of all souls who are looking for us, who need this force field. I call for great teams of conquerors from the great central sun, beloved Hercules in Amazonia, legions of white fire and blue lightning. Let the will of God be done. Let the souls of light be drawn in. We thank thee. We accept it done this hour in full power. We are grateful for this darshan with you, beloved El Moria. Make us instruments of your chelas and bring them home swiftly, for the hour is short. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and the Divine Mother. Amen. Thank you, everyone.